By the dawn of the 20th century, aviation was already becoming a critical element of warfare. The ability to strike from the skies had become a must-have tool for modern militaries. But as World War I raged across Europe, military leaders realized there was a major drawback to having airplanes. Getting them to the front line was not easy. Traditional aircraft were large, unwieldy machines. They required extensive maintenance and a lot of manpower to operate. So when the war ended and the United States began exploring ways to improve military efficiency, it seemed obvious to start with aviation. What if there was a way to transport aircraft without all the bulk and expense? It might sound ridiculous, but in 1917, the US military actually started experimenting with an airplane that could be deflated like a balloon. The idea was simple. Take the guts of an existing aircraft and package it in a portable, lightweight kit. With just a few soldiers and a bicycle pump, they could have a plane up in the air within minutes. Back then, it was all about speed and mobility. The military wanted to deploy aircraft anywhere and everywhere. They needed an airplane that could fit in a backpack. That led to the creation of the US Army Air Service's primary kite balloon. But after the war ended, funding dried up, and so did the project. But the dream didn't die. Fast forward to 1956, the height of the Cold War and the jet age. Commercial and military aviation was racing forward at breakneck speed. Jet engines, supersonic flight and rocket-powered dreams were transforming the skies. But deep in the labs of Goodyear, the tire company, engineers were working on something different, a throwback to an earlier era, a rubber airplane. At first glance, it seems insane. A plane made out of tires, but Goodyear was serious. Their plan was simple. Take the place of bulky metals and heavy wooden frames with lightweight rubber. The result was an airplane that could literally be inflated like a balloon. The company named it the Inflatable, but most people just called it the Goodyear blimp, and the timing couldn't have been better. Goodyear had spent years developing a new type of rubberized fabric for tires, lighter and tougher than anything on the market. They called it nylon fabric. It was perfect for their latest project. Using a network of interconnected air cells, Goodyear engineers built a frame, then they covered it all in the super-strong nylon fabric. The end result was something between a giant balloon animal and a blimp. And when it came to flying, well, that was anyone's guess. But Goodyear knew who they wanted to impress: the US military. In the early 1950s, the military had begun to realize the importance of aviation in the Cold War. Pilots were regularly being shot down over Europe and Asia, and the race to rescue them was often fraught with danger. The Soviets were watching closely, and the US needed a way to save their men faster than the enemy could capture them. The solution had to be light enough to be carried by paratroopers, tough enough to survive the rigors of combat, and fast enough to get pilots to safety before it was too late. This is where the Inflatable came in. But would it work? Testing began in earnest in 1957. A team of Goodyear engineers and test pilots took to the skies above East Hartford, Connecticut. The first flights were promising. The plane was able to take off and land smoothly. But as soon as they tried to maneuver, the problem became apparent. The Inflatable was ridiculously slow, lumbering through the air at just 45 miles per hour. It was slower than commercial airliners from the 1930s. Even worse, the plane lacked any kind of stability. Every bump or gust of wind sent it wildly off course. But Goodyear pushed ahead. They redesigned the wing structure and made adjustments to improve the handling. By 1959, the Inflatable was finally ready for prime time, or so they thought. The official tests began on September 16, 1959. A crowd of military officials and press gathered to watch the Goodyear Inflatable soar through the skies. But the first flight ended in disaster. The plane lost power, crashed and burned, sending thick black smoke billowing into the air. Thankfully, both pilots managed to eject safely, but the damage to Goodyear's reputation was severe. The Inflatable was supposed to be the future of military aviation. Instead, it was nothing but scrap metal and embarrassment. Despite the setback, Goodyear and the military refused to give up. For the next 3 years, the two sides worked to improve the Inflatable's design. They tweaked the frame, tested new engines, and tried everything they could to make the plane stable. But the results were frustrating. At best, the Inflatable was just a mediocre aircraft. At worst, it was a smoking, crashing pile of rubber. Despite the failure, the military invested heavily in the Inflatable project. They saw it as the key to winning the battle of hearts and minds during the Cold War. If it worked, They could win international goodwill by showcasing the incredible technology to the world. But the reality was far from the hype. As the 1960s dawned, the military's patience began to wear thin. The Inflatable had failed again and again. Worse yet, it was becoming increasingly clear that it never would work. The dream of an inflatable airplane was finally dead. So why did the Inflatable fail? There are many possible explanations, but the reality is likely a combination of several factors. First and foremost, the technology just wasn't ready. Goodyear's nylon fabric was revolutionary, but it was still no match for the stresses of flight. Second, the plane was incredibly heavy. It may have looked like a giant balloon, but the Inflatable was anything but light. Finally, the plane was simply too complex. With a network of interconnected air cells, there were just too many things that could go wrong. As the 1960s wore on, the US military began to focus on more practical solutions. Helicopters were already proving to be a valuable asset in rescue missions, and traditional fixed-wing aircraft were rapidly improving. As for Goodyear, they went back to focusing on tires. Today, the only trace of the Inflatable can be found in old newsreels and forgotten patents. The US military has long since moved on to more advanced technology, but for a brief moment in time, the future of aviation looked a lot like a giant balloon. But the dream of inflatable airplanes didn't fully die. As we know, it lives on today in the most unexpected places. But what does the future hold? Will inflatable airplanes ever soar through the skies once again? Well, that remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, the quest to make aviation more accessible, efficient and exciting will continue. And who knows, maybe one day the Inflatable will make a triumphant return. When the US military abandoned the Inflatable project in the early 1960s, Goodyear was left with a massive investment and a whole lot of rubber. But instead of throwing in the towel, the company decided to try something new. They launched a marketing campaign that promised families everywhere a fun and exciting way to enjoy the skies. The Goodyear blimp was born. Families could now buy their very own inflatable airplane for backyard adventures. All it took was a little imagination and a lot of air. Goodyear launched the Inflatables with a massive advertising blitz. The planes were featured in TV commercials, magazines and newspapers all across the country. Kids dreamed of having their very own flying machine, and parents loved the idea of giving their kids a fun and educational experience. But as with everything else in life, there was a catch. The Goodyear blimp wasn't exactly built for performance. It was small, underpowered, and downright dangerous. But Goodyear didn't care. They were in the business of selling tires, not airplanes. Over the next decade, thousands of Inflatables were sold across the United States. Families took to the skies on weekends and vacations. And for a while, it seemed like Goodyear had struck gold. But as the 1970s wore on, the novelty began to fade. People realized that the Goodyear blimp wasn't the exciting adventure they had been promised. Instead, it was a cramped, uncomfortable ride that barely lifted off the ground. Today, the Goodyear blimp is still around, but it's a far cry from the original vision. Instead of being a fun family activity, the Goodyear blimp is now a corporate mascot. The iconic blimp floats lazily over sporting events and parades, taking in the sights and promoting Goodyear tires. It's a far cry from the days when families could buy their own inflatable airplanes. But hey, at least the Goodyear blimp is still around. So what happened to the US military's secret weapon? Well, the truth is that no one really knows. The Inflatable was top secret for so long that there are no records or blueprints available. Some believe the Inflatable was simply scrapped when the military shifted their focus. Others believe the Inflatable is still hidden away in a secret hangar somewhere. Only time will tell the truth. What do you think? Was the Inflatable doomed from the start, or was it ahead of its time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories. Thanks for watching. See you next time.